For $50, a lonely cowboy purchased a ranch. What he discovered left him stunned. Elijah Boone was a man most people hardly noticed. In the small cattle town where he passed through each year, he was just another quiet cowboy with a worn hat and dust on his boots. He did his work well, never complained, and never stayed long enough for anyone to ask questions. When people talked about him at all, they usually said the same thing: he kept to himself. Elijah had not always planned to live that way. When he was younger, he had imagined a simple future, a small home, a family, steady work, and land of his own someday. But life did not follow his plans. His wife passed away only a few years after they married, leaving him with a silence that felt heavier than any physical load he had ever carried. After that, Elijah stopped putting down roots. He moved where the work took him and slept under different roofs, never staying long enough to feel at home. By the late 1930s, times were hard for almost everyone. Jobs were scarce, towns were shrinking, and hope felt thinner each year. Ranches that once supported families now struggled to survive. Many landowners walked away, unable to keep up with repairs, taxes, or debt. Elijah saw all of this from the outside, moving from ranch to ranch, earning just enough to get by. He saved carefully, though no one knew why. Every dollar he earned he treated with respect. He fixed his own clothes, ate simple meals, and avoided unnecessary spending. After years of doing this, he had managed to save $50. It was not much, but to Elijah, it represented years of patience and discipline. One evening, after finishing a long day of work, Elijah sat outside a small general store on the edge of town. A few men nearby were talking loudly, laughing as they shared stories. Elijah wasn't listening at first, but one comment caught his attention. They were talking about a ranch far from town, a piece of land no one wanted anymore. According to them, it had been sold and resold over the years, each time for less money. The last owner had left without even taking his tools. The men joked that the land was cursed, useless, and not worth the paper the deed was written on. Someone laughed and said, "I'd give it away for $50 if I could." He lay awake on a narrow bed in the bunkhouse, staring at the ceiling. The idea of owning land, his own land, felt almost unreal. He knew the risks. A ranch that cheap was cheap for a reason. Still, something about the story stayed with him. Maybe it was because he had nothing to lose, or maybe it was because, for the first time in years, he felt a small spark of possibility. The next day, Elijah quietly asked around about the ranch. Most people reacted with surprise or amusement when he brought it up. Some shook their heads and warned him to stay away. Others told him stories they had heard: failed crops, broken fences, bad luck that never seemed to end. No one spoke kindly of the place, but Elijah noticed something important. None of the people warning him had actually lived there. They were repeating stories passed down through years of gossip and fear. Eventually, he found an older man in town who had some knowledge of the land records. The man confirmed that the ranch was indeed for sale and that the price was exactly $50. The paperwork was simple, almost careless, as if no one expected anyone to actually want it. When Elijah handed over the money, the man looked at him with raised eyebrows. "You sure about this?" he asked. Elijah nodded. "Yes, sir." Elijah didn't respond. He packed his few belongings, borrowed a wagon, and set off toward the land that now belonged to him. The journey took most of the day. The road grew narrower the farther he traveled, eventually turning into little more than a dirt path. The land around him felt empty and quiet, broken only by the sound of wind and the slow movement of his horse. When he finally arrived, the ranch looked worse than he had imagined. The fence posts leaned at odd angles, some barely standing. Weeds had taken over large patches of ground. The farmhouse was small and weathered, with a roof that sagged slightly in the middle. Windows were dusty, and the front door creaked loudly when he pushed it open. Inside, the house was bare. A few broken pieces of furniture sat in corners, and the air smelled old and unused. Elijah set his bag down and stood quietly for a moment, listening. There were no strange sounds, no signs of anything unusual, just silence. As he stepped back outside, he took a slow walk across the land. The soil was dry, but not lifeless. He knelt down and ran it through his fingers, studying it carefully. Years of working on other ranches had taught him how land felt when it still had potential. This land, despite its reputation, did not feel dead. As the sun began to set, Elijah sat on the porch of the farmhouse, watching the sky change colors. He felt tired but also strangely calm. For the first time in many years, he was not just passing through. This place, broken as it was, belonged to him. Loneliness still followed him, but it felt different here. It was quieter, less heavy. The land did not judge him or expect anything from him. It simply existed, waiting. That night, Elijah slept on the floor with his coat folded under his head. The wind rattled the loose boards of the house, but he slept deeply. In his dreams, he saw open fields and clear water, though he could not explain why. By morning, Elijah was ready to begin. He didn't know what the future held, and he didn't expect miracles. All he knew was that he had work to do and time to do it. For a man who had spent years drifting, that was more than enough. This ranch, bought for the price of a few saved bills, marked the first real choice Elijah had made for himself in a long time. And though he could not yet see it, that choice was about to change everything. The first few days on the ranch tested Elijah's patience in ways he had not expected. Morning light revealed problems that darkness had hidden. The fence lines were worse than he thought, many broken completely. The ground was uneven, filled with stones and thorny plants that clung to his clothes. Every step reminded him that this land had been left alone for a very long time. Elijah began with small tasks. He cleaned the farmhouse first, sweeping out dust and clearing old debris. The work was slow, but it gave him comfort. Each cleared corner made the place feel a little more alive. He repaired what he could with simple tools, using scrap wood left behind by previous owners. The roof still sagged, but it no longer leaked badly. The door closed properly after he fixed its hinges. These small victories mattered to him. Food was simple. He cooked over a small fire outside, using beans, bread, and whatever he had brought with him. There was no nearby town to visit easily, so he planned carefully. Every meal reminded him that survival here would depend on discipline and effort. As days passed, Elijah explored the land more closely. He walked the boundaries, noting where fences had once stood strong. He found old animal tracks, faint but present, suggesting that livestock had once lived here. That discovery surprised him. The stories said animals refused to stay, yet signs remained that they had at some point. One afternoon, while following a dry creek bed, Elijah noticed something unusual. The soil near the creek felt different under his boots. It was firmer, darker, and cooler to the touch. He knelt and examined it carefully. This was not the soil of land completely without hope. It held memory like it had known water once. Still, the well near the farmhouse remained sealed and useless. A heavy wooden cover sat over it, cracked with age. Rope fragments lay nearby, brittle and broken. Elijah understood that water would decide everything. Without it, the ranch would fail just like before. At night, loneliness returned stronger. The silence stretched endlessly. There were no voices, no distant lights, no sounds of life except the wind and the occasional call of a bird. Elijah sat by the fire, thinking about the people who had walked away from this place. He wondered what they had felt in their final days here, frustration, fear, or simple exhaustion. Soon he began hearing stories again, but this time from memory. He recalled the laughter at the general store, the warnings, the jokes. At moments, doubt crept in. He asked himself if he had made a mistake, but each time the thought appeared, he pushed it aside. Doubt, he believed, was easy. Commitment was harder. After a week, Elijah made his first trip back to town. He needed supplies, nails, rope, and better tools. When people saw him, reactions were mixed. Some looked curious, others amused. A few shook their heads as if he were wasting his life. One man asked, "Still alive out there?" Elijah smiled politely. So far. No one offered help. No one asked questions beyond casual remarks. Elijah did not mind. He preferred it that way. He returned to the ranch with his supplies and his resolve intact. Work became his routine. He repaired fencing little by little, marking sections for future improvement. He cleared weeds and burned dead brush safely away from the house. The land responded slowly, but it responded. Tiny signs appeared: stronger soil, insects returning, birds nesting nearby. Still, water remained missing. The creek stayed dry. The well stayed sealed. One evening, while examining the well again, Elijah noticed marks on the stone rim. They were faint, worn by time, but deliberate. Someone had carved symbols or lines long ago. He traced them with his fingers, feeling a sense of curiosity rather than fear. These marks told a story, though he did not yet understand it. He tried to lift the cover but found it too heavy alone. The wood creaked, refusing to move. Elijah stepped back, breathing hard. That night he dreamed again of open fields and flowing water, clearer than before. Days later, a sudden storm passed through the area. Rain fell briefly, soaking the ground before disappearing as quickly as it came. Elijah watched closely. He noticed something strange. Water pooled near the old creek bed but vanished into the soil instead of running off. That observation stayed with him. He followed the path of the vanished water, marking spots where the ground seemed to absorb it faster. His instincts told him something important lay beneath. The ranch's reputation continued to echo in his mind. People said the land rejected effort. But Elijah began to suspect the land had not failed by itself. Something had been changed, altered, or hidden. One afternoon, he found an old ledger in the farmhouse, tucked behind a loose board. Its pages were yellowed, fragile but readable. It belonged to a previous owner from many years earlier. The entries spoke of strong harvests, healthy animals, and shared water with nearby landowners. Then suddenly, the writing stopped. The final entry mentioned conflict, arguments over boundaries, and water access. It did not explain more, but it was enough. Elijah sat quietly, holding the ledger, feeling both excitement and concern. That night, the ranch felt different. Not threatening, not mysterious, but misunderstood. Elijah realized that the stories people told were not complete truths. They were fragments shaped by fear and distance. From that moment on, Elijah stopped thinking of the land as abandoned. He began thinking of it as interrupted. The next morning, he committed himself fully. He would uncover the truth beneath the soil, no matter how long it took. He would listen to the land, study it, and work with it rather than against it. As the sun rose over the quiet ranch, Elijah stood near the sealed well, his shadow stretching across the ground. He felt tired but steady. Whatever secrets lay hidden here, he was ready to face them, not with fear but with patience. And for the first time since arriving, Elijah felt certain of one thing: the ranch had not been empty when he found it. It had been waiting, holding its breath, ready for someone who would stay. Elijah woke up early the next morning with a strong feeling that something important was close. The air felt cooler, and the land seemed quieter than usual, as if it was watching him. He ate a simple breakfast and walked straight toward the old well. The marks on the stone rim were still clear in his mind. He could not stop thinking about them. He circled the well slowly, studying every detail. The stones were placed too carefully to be random. Someone had taken time to build this well with purpose. Elijah knelt and brushed dirt away from the base. As he did, he noticed a narrow line in the ground leading away from it. At first, it looked like a crack, but when he followed it, he realized it was something else. It was a channel. The channel was shallow and mostly filled with dirt and weeds, but its shape was clear. Elijah followed it for several yards until it disappeared beneath heavy soil. His heart beat faster. He had seen irrigation paths before on other ranches. This looked very similar. Elijah returned to the farmhouse and gathered his tools. He began digging carefully along the channel, clearing years of packed dirt. The work was slow and tiring. His hands ached and sweat soaked through his shirt. But he did not stop. With each small section uncovered, the channel became more visible. As the sun climbed higher, Elijah uncovered more of the hidden path. It stretched farther than he expected, leading toward the dry creek bed. This discovery made him pause. If water once flowed here, then the land had not failed naturally. It had been cut off. He rested briefly under the shade of a tree, drinking water and thinking. The ledger he found came back to his mind. The mention of arguments over water made sense now. Someone had redirected it, buried it, or blocked it to take control. Elijah stood up with new energy. He returned to the well and examined the heavy wooden cover again. This time, instead of trying to lift it straight up, he worked around the edges. He removed nails, loosened boards, and carefully took it apart piece by piece. Beneath the cover, darkness waited. Elijah lowered a lantern slowly. The stone walls of the well went down farther than he expected. As the light reached lower, something caught his eye. There was moisture. The stones near the bottom were darker, wet to the touch. Elijah felt a rush of excitement mixed with caution. He tied a rope securely and lowered a bucket. When he pulled it back up, the bucket was not empty. Water filled the bottom. Elijah laughed softly, a sound he had not made in a long time. He touched the water with his fingers. It was cool and clear. The well was not dry. It had been sealed on purpose. Carefully, Elijah removed debris blocking the lower opening of the well. As he worked, water began to rise slowly. Not rushing, not flooding, but returning. Over the next few days, Elijah focused entirely on clearing the underground system. He followed the hidden channels, digging and repairing where needed. Some sections had been intentionally collapsed. Others were buried deep. Each discovery told the same story. The land had been damaged by human choices, not fate. One afternoon, while clearing a blocked section, Elijah uncovered flat stones placed tightly together. When he removed them, water began to flow gently through the channel. He stepped back, watching as it followed its old path. The dry creek bed changed first. Dampness returned, then small streams. The soil darkened and the air felt cooler. Elijah stood there in disbelief. The ranch was waking up. Animals noticed it before people did. Birds returned in greater numbers. Small creatures appeared near the water. Even plants responded. Green shoots pushed through soil that had been barren for years. Elijah worked day after day, careful not to rush. He respected the flow, letting it move naturally. He built small barriers where needed, guiding water gently rather than forcing it. At night, exhaustion followed him, but it was a good kind of tired. He slept deeply, dreaming of growing fields and peaceful mornings. Loneliness still existed, but it no longer felt empty. The land felt like company. After nearly 2 weeks, the transformation was clear. Grass spread across sections of the ranch. The soil held moisture. The air smelled fresh. Elijah stood on a small rise and looked out across his land, hardly recognizing it. One morning, he noticed something else. The water flow was steady, but there was more beneath. Curious, he followed the channel farther uphill. There, hidden beneath rocks and earth, he found the source, a natural underground spring. It had been covered carefully, almost expertly. Whoever had done it knew exactly how to hide it. Elijah sat beside the spring in silence. He felt respect for its power and anger at the choice that had buried it. But more than anything, he felt responsibility. This water could change everything, not just for him, but for others. As days passed, news began to spread. Travelers noticed green land where none had been before. Ranchers passing nearby slowed their horses, staring in disbelief. Some even stopped to ask questions. Elijah answered simply, "I fixed what was broken." The same people who once laughed now whispered. Some were curious, others were uneasy, a few even seemed nervous. One afternoon, an older rancher visited. He stood quietly for a long time, watching the flowing water. "I heard stories," the man said finally. "Didn't believe them. People wanted control." He felt stunned, not just by what he had found, but by what it meant. The ranch was worth far more than $50, but that thought did not excite him. What mattered was that he had uncovered truth where lies had lived for years. As he sat on the porch that night, listening to the gentle sound of moving water, Elijah knew his life had changed forever. The land had trusted him with its secret, and he intended to honor that trust. The changes on the ranch did not stay hidden for long. Within weeks, the once dull land began to look alive in a way no one remembered. Green patches spread wider each day. Grass grew thick and strong, bending gently with the wind. The dry air felt softer, cooler, as if the land itself was breathing again. Elijah worked from sunrise to sunset. He did not rush, but he did not rest much either. Each day, he guided the water carefully, opening small paths, closing others, watching how the land responded. He had learned over the years that nature worked best when treated with patience. He never forced the flow, he listened. Soon, he brought a few animals onto the land, just a small number at first. He watched closely to see how they behaved. To his relief, they stayed calm. They grazed peacefully, drank from the restored water paths, and did not try to escape. That alone proved how wrong the old stories had been. Elijah repaired more fencing, strengthening the borders of the ranch. The work was hard, but it felt meaningful. Each repaired post felt like a promise kept. At night, he sat outside the farmhouse, watching the stars reflect in the water channels. He felt tired in his body but steady in his heart. People from nearby land began to notice the change. Some passed by slowly, pretending not to stare. Others stopped openly, asking polite questions. Elijah answered honestly but simply. He did not boast. He did not hide the truth either. "I found water," he said. "It was always here." Word reached town quickly. The same voices that once laughed now spoke with surprise. Some people felt regret. Others felt interest. A few saw opportunity. One morning, a man arrived with a wagon and a confident smile. He introduced himself and spoke kindly, but his eyes studied the land closely. He praised Elijah's work and mentioned how valuable the ranch must be now. "I could make you a fair offer," the man said. Elijah shook his head gently. "I'm not selling." The man looked surprised. "Everyone sells eventually." Elijah replied, "Not everyone." More offers followed in the weeks ahead. Some were generous, others urgent. Elijah refused them all. The land was not a prize to him. It was a responsibility. Instead of selling, Elijah chose a different path. He allowed nearby struggling families to bring their animals to drink during dry days. He never asked for payment. He simply asked for respect for the land and for one another. At first, people were unsure. They expected rules, contracts, or hidden conditions. But Elijah offered none. Slowly, trust grew. A family with little left brought their cattle. Another asked if they could help repair fencing in exchange for water access. Elijah agreed. Work became shared. Burdens became lighter. The ranch slowly turned into a place of movement and cooperation. People came not to take, but to contribute. Children helped carry tools. Older men shared knowledge. Women brought meals during long workdays. Laughter returned to land that had known only silence. The farmhouse no longer felt empty. It was still simple, but it felt warm. Footsteps echoed through its rooms. Conversations filled the air. Elijah noticed something unexpected. His loneliness faded without him trying to push it away. He did not become loud or social overnight. He remained quiet, thoughtful, but he was no longer invisible. One afternoon, a long drought hit the surrounding lands. Fields dried up quickly. Worry spread across the region. Ranchers counted losses and feared the worst. Elijah's ranch held firm. The underground spring continued to flow steadily. He adjusted the channels carefully to make sure the water lasted. When word spread that his land still had water, people came from farther away. Elijah faced a hard choice. He knew he could not help everyone without risking damage to the source. He gathered those already working with him and spoke honestly. "We share what we can," he said, "but we protect this place. If the spring fails, no one wins." The group agreed. Together they set fair limits. Water was shared wisely, not wasted. No one argued. Everyone understood the value of balance. This decision earned Elijah deep respect. People saw that he was not driven by profit or pride, but by care. The drought passed eventually, but its memory stayed. Stories spread about the ranch that survived while others struggled. Elijah became known not as the lonely cowboy, but as the man who listened to the land. One evening, Elijah walked alone to the spring. He sat beside it quietly, watching the water move. He thought about the people who had buried it long ago, afraid of losing control. He wondered how much pain could have been avoided if they had chosen differently. He placed his hand in the water and whispered a quiet promise to protect it. As months turned into years, the ranch became stronger than ever. Crops grew well. Animals thrived. The soil stayed rich. The land no longer looked abandoned, it looked proud. Elijah never forgot how close it had come to being lost forever. Sometimes visitors asked him if he felt lucky. He would smile and say, "No, just patient." The ranch did more than give him stability. It gave him purpose. Each morning, Elijah woke knowing his work mattered not just to him, but to others. And though he still valued silence, it no longer felt empty. It felt peaceful. As the sun set one evening, casting long shadows across the fields, Elijah stood watching the water move gently through the land. What had once been hidden now flowed freely. The ranch had come back to life. And in doing so, it had changed everyone who touched it, most of all, the quiet cowboy who chose to stay. Years passed quietly on the ranch, marked not by loud celebrations or sudden fame, but by steady growth and shared effort. Elijah grew older, his hair turning lighter, his movements slower, yet his presence remained strong. Each morning he walked the land just as he always had, checking the water paths, the fences, and the animals. The ranch no longer needed constant repair, but it still needed care, and Elijah never stopped giving it. The place had become more than land. It had become a meeting point. People came not just for water or work, but for guidance. They trusted Elijah's judgment because he never spoke without thought and never acted without reason. When disagreements arose, he listened first. That alone solved many problems. The younger generation watched him closely. Children who once played near the water channels grew into adults who understood the value of patience and cooperation. They learned that land was not something to take from, but something to protect. Elijah never called himself a leader, but people followed his example. He taught without lectures, simply by doing what was right again and again. He showed that quiet choices could have lasting effects. One afternoon, a young man asked him, "Why didn't you sell when you could have made so much money?" Elijah thought for a moment before answering. "Money passes quickly," he said, "but responsibility stays." As time moved forward, the ranch weathered many seasons. There were years of strong rain and years of dryness. Through it all, the spring continued to flow, steady and calm, just like the man who had uncovered it. Elijah prepared carefully for the future. He kept records, trained others to maintain the water system, and made sure the knowledge would not disappear with him. He understood that what he had protected needed to outlive him. One evening, as the sun lowered and painted the sky in soft colors, Elijah sat on the porch, feeling the weight of years behind him. He thought about the day he first arrived, alone and uncertain. He remembered the broken fences, the dry ground, and the laughter of people who thought he had made a foolish choice. He smiled gently. The ranch had given him more than shelter or work. It had given him connection. It had turned loneliness into purpose. When Elijah eventually passed away, it was peaceful and quiet, just as he had lived. There were no grand announcements, but the ranch felt the loss immediately. People gathered without being asked. They stood together, sharing memories, understanding what he had given them. No one argued over the land. No one tried to claim more than their share. Elijah's values had taken root deeper than any fence post. The ranch continued to thrive, guided by those who had learned from him. The water still flowed. The fields still grew green. The land remained open and fair. Visitors sometimes asked about the man who bought the ranch for $50. The story was told simply, without exaggeration. A quiet cowboy, a hidden spring, a choice to stay. What stunned people most was not the discovery itself, but what came after. Elijah had shown that real wealth was not found in ownership alone, but in care, honesty, and patience. The ranch stood as proof that even forgotten places could return to life when met with respect. And long after Elijah was gone, the land still whispered his story in every flowing stream and growing field. A reminder that some choices, made quietly, can change everything.